Welcome to Section 2, where we're going to discuss view models in depth. Let's start with a basic overview of the view model. Let's take a more in-depth look at working with data binding. We'll create a new project, and of course it'll be a mobile app. And let's call this one MVVM for Model View View Model, which is a central practice in mobile programming. When the new application opens up, let's close the head projects and create a folder in the main project, and we'll call that folder model. And I should tell you there's some controversy whether it should be model or models, but I'll go with the singular. And let's add a second folder, and we'll call it view. And finally, we need a third folder called view model. The idea is that view is going to hold everything that we see on the page, view model is going to hold our logic, and model is going to hold our data. Let's take mainpage.xaml and move it into the view folder. It'll need a little fixing up, but it's more consistent to have that in the view folder since it is a view. Let's go to the XAML page and change the class from MVVM to MVVM.view. Let's go to the code behind and change the namespace as well. We can get rid of these comments. Now my emulator is not up, so let's bring up Genymotion and tell it to turn on my emulator, which will just take a few seconds for the virtual device to spin up. If you're working with the built-in emulator, you can start that, and if you're working on iOS, you can bring up the iOS simulator. And of course, for any of this, you can use actual devices. Now that the emulator is up, let's go over and start it up and make sure that everything is right. We immediately run into a namespace problem with main page. So let's click on main page, go to the helper, which is that little yellow light bulb, and tell it to use MVVM view. I'm going to leave all the exceptions and errors in as I build this so you can see the kinds of things you're likely to run into and how you might solve them. Let's build it again, bring up the emulator, and sure enough, we have Welcome to Xamarin.Forms now working with main page and views. Great. We're ready to get started a little more seriously. In our XAML for main page, let's start by modifying the label. The very first thing we're going to do is set the text to bind to a property in the view model. We do that with the keyword binding. Welcome text we expect to be a property in the view model. Now, how do we tell that it's the view model we want to bind to? We'll go into the code behind and we'll set the binding context. And we're going to set that to the view model. So we create a new instance of main page view model, and that's what we set to the binding context. And that says, here's where you look for the properties that I'm binding to. Let's go and create a new class in the view model folder called main page view model, which is what we just told Xamarin that we're going to bind to. Let's make that class public. And once again, what we're saying is we're going to bind to welcome text in that view model. So let's go to that view model and give it that property. I'm going to use a snippet that I wrote to make doing so easier. You can see that it opens up and gets the type, and then the backing variable, and then you hit tab, and you give it the main property name, and it sets everything up for you. If you're not familiar with snippets, let's take a quick look under Tools, Snippet Manager. You see that it has basic, and now we're going to go down to C#, and those are folders filled with different kinds of snippets. I'm going to go up to My Code Snippets, and in there you see Properties, and we have a description, the shortcut, the snippet type, and the author. If you really want to see what's behind that, let's go over to the file. We'll start with the folder, drop that in to our File Explorer. There's our snippet file. Let's open that up with VS Code to make it easy to see. And you can see this is a complex but really a boilerplate file in which we fill out the parts of the file for what we're going to call it, who the author is, what the description is, what language it's using, and then we come to the body of the snippet. And here you can see it says private type, so that'll be string or bool, private var, that'll be the underbar, public type, same type, public property, and then it fills in by using those same variables, it fills in the property. So let's go back to where we were. Here's our welcome text property. Notice that set value has a red line under it. That's because we have not yet inherited from base view model. All of our view models are going to inherit from base view model. We haven't created base view model yet, so let's do that. And base view model is always the same. So what I recommend is that you download it from GitHub rather than us walking through in great detail. I'll just drop in the code for base view model. You can see that it has at first an event of type property changed event handler called property changed. Now part of why that's got a red squiggly, we need to tell base view model that it implements iNotify property changed. And let's just get the right using statement for that. We still have a couple squiggly lines under caller member name, which is going to automatically get the name of the property that is asking for property notification to be raised. So let's click on that. Use the yellow light bulb to find the using statement we need. And so we're ready now to support set value and our property changed automatically. And you can see that set value calls on property changed for you. So back in main page view model, we now inherit from base view model, which allows set value to work. Back in XAML, we can see we're going to bind to welcome text. And in the main page view model, we can see that we have welcome text, but we haven't initialized it. And of course, that value can come from virtually anywhere. We're going to create it in the constructor just to get a value in there. So we're going to say welcome text equals hello pack, and that will set the property that we're going to bind to. So the complete circuit is we set that property value, then we bind to that property value from the XAML. And you can see that the text is set to binding welcome text, and that has to be in curly braces. Let's run that and see if we get our welcome text. Oh, we got stuck because main page view model, you remember we moved, and so we're going to have to tell it where that is. All right, let's try again. It deploys, and there we have hello pack. So that is now a bound text. As described before, if we want to modify our XAML, we can use hot reload, and that allows us to make changes in the XAML and see it immediately in our device or emulator. So let's set the font size a little bit bigger and hit save, and we should see that jump up, and sure enough it does. And while we're at it, let's set the text color to red so it stands out a bit. Save it, and there we go. And this allows you to quickly arrange the look and feel of your application. Next, under our stack layout, let's create a button. We're going to set the button text to count to 100, although we could, of course, bind the text. But what I want to show here is commands. Rather than using an event, we're going to use a command, and the advantage is commands are handled in the view model rather than the code behind. And we want as much as possible to be in the view model. It makes it much easier for testing. So here we're saying command is going to bind to something called count command. Once again, since we're binding, we expect count command to be in the view model. Let's stop running and make Visual Studio a little bit bigger. And let's go over to the view model and handle that command. There are two ways to handle a command. One is to declare it and then implement it in the constructor. The way that I prefer, however, is to declare it and implement it at the same time. So outside of any method but inside the class, I'm going to say that I have an I command called count command, and that goes to a new command, and we pass in the name of the method we want to call with that command. Now notice Visual Studio put I command again, so let's take off that I and see if we can get rid of some of these red squiggles. One of them is because we don't have an onCount method. So let's start by creating our onCount method. And we're going to do something incredibly simple here. We'll just create a variable x and initialize it to 0. And then while x is less than 100, we're going to increment x. And then we'll take the result and write it to the console. So that's just there so that we can see that the command works. Now let's go up to I command and hit the light bulb and add the namespace that we need for I command. And then go over to command, hit the light bulb again, and we'll add Xamarin.Forms, the namespace we need for command. So once again, the round trip is that in the Xamarin, we're calling bind count command. We're binding count command to the command on the button. And when the button is clicked, that command will cause our view model to call onCount. So let's put a breakpoint in onCount, and when we click the button, we should see us hit that breakpoint. Let's run the application. The app comes up, and there's our button, count to 100, and when we click it, sure enough, we stop right in the onCount method, as we expected. Let's stop the application, and let's do something a little bit more complicated. We'll go over to the Models folder and create a new model. And we're going to call that model car. Let's make our class public and give our car a couple properties. And here we're going to use automatic properties. So that's very simple. And we'll give it two properties, the year and the model. It'll be convenient to have a constructor for car. So let's go ahead and create one that takes two strings, one for the year and one for the model. And our constructor, as you might guess, will set the properties from the arguments that are passed into the constructor. So now we have a model, which is our class car, and you notice the namespace says it's an MVVM model. Let's go back to our XAML, and we want to display that information. We've seen formatted strings before, so I'll just drop in a formatted string. But notice that my car year and my car model are bound to that text. Back in the view model, we're going to create another property, and this one of type car. Now, Visual Studio didn't know about the type car, so let's use the light bulb and tell it to look in the model's namespace. So now we have car. We're going to have a little bit of trouble with filling out this property because we broke out of the snippet, but we can do it by hand. And now we have a car with a backing variable and a property called myCar. We need to set the type to be of type car. Let's return to our label, and notice it says I bought a, and then we have a span for space, and then we bind to mycar.year, where year is a property on the car object. Let's initialize that car once again in the constructor, although again you might pull this out of a database or from a method. But right now we're going to have the constructor set a new car, and you remember that takes two parameters, both strings. So we'll put in the year and the model. And let's run that. And you can see on the bottom that the binding worked perfectly using the fields from the car object.